Okay. Um, let's get started. This is part 6 of our series on the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia. We will be this evening starting at the bottom of, or sorry, near the bottom of page 46b and going to 46a. Sorry, 47a. And sorry, I just need to move things around on my screen. There we go. Okay. So we had last time we had a Breita that was going to force us to admit that you could transfer ownership of money using chalipin, and we didn't want to prove that because there was a dispute about it. So we didn't want it to be decided one way or the other. We fixed that problem by interpreting the Breita differently, but that forced us to read the end of the Breita as talking about bartering different kinds of animals for each other as a form of chalipin. So we're going to start now dealing with some issues that causes. Okay, so beginning here at the top of the page says Hanicha l'Rav Sheshet de Amar Pere Avdi Chalipin. So that interpretation of the end of the Breita, in which we have the people bartering animals for each other, and we treat that as Chalipin, that works for Rav Sheshet, because Rav Sheshet says that fruit, or in this case, I think what he really means is well, it might be what he means is food, or it might be what he means is merchandise that isn't vessels, can be used for chalipin. Ela Rav Nachman, but the problem is that Rav Nachman said, Kli'in aval pere lo'avdi chalipin. He said, you can use a kli, a vessel, for chalipin, but you can't use fruit. So let's just take 1 second in the middle of this line here to explain what that means. So in modern Hebrew, a kli tends to specifically be a container that you would put food in, right? A dish, or maybe a pot. In classical Hebrew, a kli is a much broader term, but it's still not completely unlimited. A kli has to be something that's man-made. It has to be manufactured for a particular use and useful for that use. And it has to be small enough to be picked up and carried around. So that would include such things as clothing, shoes, right? Those are the things that we classically see being used as chalipin, would be a kerchief or a handkerchief or a shoe, right? The shoe was the original one in Megillat Rut. It would also include tableware and pots and pans and things like that. And it would also include things like smaller furniture, weapons, those kinds of things. But not something like a live animal or a bunch of grapes, right? So it seems like Rav Sheshet thinks that you could use a cow or a bunch of grapes to do chalipin, and Rav Nachman says you need a kli. You can't use those things. Okay, so according to him, my ketzad, what is the last line of the Breita mean? That Breita began how, and it was, how does it work when you trade a bull for a cow or a donkey for a bull? That was that last line of the Breita. What is it gonna mean if it can't mean that trading those animals for each other is a form of chalipin? Because Rav Nachman wouldn't be willing to read it that way. Okay, so hachikar. This is going to be how Rav Nachman's going to be able to read the Breita. Yesh damim shehen kechalipin. He would read it as saying there are times when trading value operates like chalipin. Not necessarily that there is chalipin, but it works the same way as chalipin. Ketzad hechliv dmei shor b'para or dmei chamor b'shor. That would be if you traded the value of a bull for a cow or the value of a donkey for a bull. My time made the Rav Nachman. So why would Rav Nachman think that works? Savar la k'Rabbi Yochanan de Amar Dvar Torah Ma'ut Konet. Because maybe Rav Nachman thinks like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the original rule in the Torah for how transactions take place is that a transaction is completed by paying the money. Right? That we had this old dispute, which I think we've mentioned once before, between Rabbi Yochanan, and Reish Lakish, in which Rabbi Yochanan thinks that originally it used to be on a fundamental level that if you paid the money, then the transaction was over. And then the rabbis kind of interfered with that system. And they said, no, we need to stop that and change the rules and say that the transaction isn't completed until you deliver the merchandise. Where at the same time, Reish Lakish said, no, the original rule, even in the Torah, was that the transaction is only completed when the merchandise is handed over. Okay, so we think we can understand Rav Nachman's reasoning about these animals if we understand that he agrees with Rabbi Yochanan that originally the rule according to the Torah was that paying money completes the transaction. Now we have a tangent for a second. And why? So in that case, why did the rabbis say that you need to receive the merchandise? That is to say, pull the fruit. That's what we call receiving the merchandise in order to finish the transaction. And the answer is Gzeira Shema Yomar Lo Nisrufu Chitecha Ba'aliyah. Because we're worried about a case in which the seller might accept the money for the sale and then stop caring what happens to the merchandise. And then later on, you'll come to pick up your merchandise from the seller, and the seller will say, oh, I'm so sorry, your stuff caught fire and it's gone. And it won't be his problem because it's not his stuff, and he won't care very much. And the rabbis just deemed it to be a better idea if the merchandise sort of automatically belongs to whoever happens at the moment to be holding on to it. That way, it is more likely that it will get protected in the event that something bad is happening to it. But so the rabbis made this rule that just paying the money is not enough to complete the transaction, but milta de lo shchicha lo gazru be'rabanan. But we have this principle that when the rabbis made decrees changing the rules, they only changed the rules for common cases, for normal cases. And so the common normal case is the case where I give you money and you give me stuff. And in that case, they said the transaction doesn't end until I get my stuff. So up until that moment, even if I've paid for it, the merchandise still belongs to the seller, and the seller is still responsible for it. And in the event that they don't deliver it for whatever reason, we can make them pay back the money or deliver the merchandise. But what that means is that in a weird case that the rabbis might not have made a decree about, it would still be the case that the transaction would be finished when the money was delivered. So if Rav Nachman thinks that the case of my trading my bull for your cow is really a case in which I'm not trading my bull for your cow, I'm trading the value of my bull for the value of your cow, and we're imagining the bull and the cow as actually being money, then now I don't need chalipin to make the transaction completed as soon as one person hands the other the animal, because now the animals are not actually animals, they're actually the value of the animal, which is to say they're money. And now the older Torah original rule would kick in and the transaction would be finished as soon as the first one is handed over. Okay. Now back in the Gemara is going on to finish quoting these cases, the positions, because we quoted Rabbi Yochanan's position. So now we're going to quote his Chavruta Reish Lakish's position as well. Reish Lakish the Amar Mishicha Miforeshet Min HaTorah. Reish Lakish says, no, I'm sorry. Pulling is explicit in the Torah, which means the Torah already said explicitly that transactions don't finish until you deliver the merchandise. In that case, Hanicha isavar lakarav sheshet, mitaritz lakarav sheshet. So then that will work fine for Reish Lakish. If you say, like Rav Sheshet, that you can do chalipin with food, but in that case, you can explain the Breita the same way Rav Sheshet explained it, that the animal bartering case at the end is about chalipin, and that chalipin works with animals, and that's fine. But, sorry, I need to scroll down. Ella is savar la karav Nachman, but if Reish Lakish agrees with Rav Nachman, de Amar, Pere lo abdi chalipin umitva lo kani. If we combine Rav Nachman's position with Reish Lakish's position, and then we say that you can't do chalipin with fruit, and money can't finish a transaction, then heichi mitaritz, how are we going to explain the end of the Breita? So we're not gonna, we give up on that combination. Korchacha kirav sheshet mitaritz. You don't have a choice except to say that if you're going to rule like Rav Reish Lakish, you also have to rule like Rav Sheshet. Right? The position of Reish Lakish is not compatible with the position of Rav Nachman. But that's okay, because we don't have any reason to believe that they would have agreed with each other. So now we are, having worked out which positions are capable of existing and which ones aren't, about how you finish a transaction and what you can do chalipin with, we are moving on to a related case. Tanan. So our Mishnah said, and this is the same Mishnah that we started with at the beginning of the year. All chattel, all movable property buys each other. And at the time when we read that, we thought what that meant was that if you're bartering one kind of movable property for another, then whoever is delivered first finishes the transaction, and now everything belongs to its new owner, even though the other side of the transaction hasn't been delivered yet. Okay, that's what we thought that meant. Now, we have a comment of Reish Lakish about the Mishnah. The Amar Reish Lakish, the afilu kis malei ma'ot bekis malei ma'ot. Reish Lakish, and remember, Reish Lakish does not think money can ever affect a transaction, but Reish Lakish says that this line of the Mishnah is even true if you have a bag of coins and I have a bag of coins and we're trading our bags of coins. Apparently those bags of coins count as metaltalin, not as money. And whichever one is traded first is going to affect the transaction and change the ownership of all of the involved stuff. That would be very deeply problematic if it really meant that Reish Lakish thinks that I can pay money, and as a result, everything would change ownership, because that's exactly what Reish Lakish says cannot work, not according to the rabbis and also not according to the Torah. Fortunately, Rav Acha has offered a solution. Rav Acha explained it as being about a bag of, Tirgama Rav Acha bedinar anka ve'anigra. Rav Acha explained that Reish Lakish is talking about a bag of anka dinars and angira dinars, which the Gemara is about to give us two definitions. I don't think it ever tells us which definition goes with which word, although maybe it doesn't matter. But it's going to give us two definitions. Echad shepsalto malchut v'echad shepsalto medina. So one is one of anker Anka and Anigra. Sorry, Angira. You know, my vowels do not match the vowels of the Hebrew. I don't know which one's correct. I guess I should look that up. In any case, but one of the two are coins that the Malchut, the government, or the office of the king has canceled. So I don't know if this is because we think there's actually something wrong with the minting of the coins, like they're not exactly the right weight or something, or the king just doesn't like the picture of him that's on it, or maybe it's pictures of the previous king, or pictures of the king's previous wife who he doesn't like anymore. I don't know exactly what's wrong with these coins, but the government has decreed that you have to hand them in and use new currency instead. And the other are coins that your local province has stopped using. No information. I don't have any information about why that might be the case either, although there could be politics involved. And it is worth noting that, for example, we have coins from the time period of the Mishnah that were minted by the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Right, so knowing that there are governments that only sort of exist minting coins, and other governments who are trying to stop them from existing might ban you from using those coins, right? There's going to be some politics about at least some coins. In any case, so we have coins that it's illegal to use. Those are the ones that the government canceled. And we have coins that it's culturally inappropriate to use. Those are the ones that the province invalidated. And the Gemara says Vitzricha, and the statement of Rav Acha needed to tell us about both kinds of coins. Because if Rav Acha had only told us about the case where the government decides that you can't use the coins anymore, then I might think that Mishum de lo Sagi Klal, that I might think that coin is not money anymore because you can't spend it anymore at all. Aval Psaltom Medina, but the ones that are only locally canceled, that are canceled by the province, Desagi Medina Achriti, those can be spent somewhere else. I could go to a different province, and apparently it would be appropriate to spend it. Ema Akati Matbeahu ve'ein matbea nikne b'chalipin. So those coins that I could spend somewhere else, if only I would go there, we might say that they're still money because they are theoretically money somewhere else. And then we would say that the Reish Lakish wouldn't allow you to, to effect the transaction by trading bags of these kinds of coins, since he doesn't allow money to effect a transaction. On the other hand, if Rav Acha had only told us that the money in the bag could be money that was canceled by the government, then we might have thought that was mishum de lo sagi le lo betzina v'lo farhesia. I'm sorry, that this is ones that were canceled by the province. I'm sorry. Then I might have thought that those stop being money because you can't spend them either in private or in public. Meaning, if the people of Massachusetts have decided that they're not accepting this coin anymore, then the people don't want it. No, the person I'm trying to pay is going to refuse to accept the money. They're not refusing to accept it because the police might catch them. They're refusing to accept it because they don't want it. So I can't do that in public or in private. On the other hand, I might, if that was the only case I knew about, I might think that the other kind of coins, the kind that are canceled by the government, would still be coins. But the ones that were canceled by the government, I might think those are still money because they can be spent in private. Right? If the person I'm paying thinks that this is perfectly good money, it's just that it's illegal for me to use it, then if no one's watching, the merchant might take it. So maybe it's still money. So I might have said about those coins that they're still money, and as a result of still being money, you can't barter them because they're money, and that would be trying to buy things with money. It wouldn't be bartering. So it's tzricha. So Rav Acha needed to teach us both cases. And we seem to be accepting this interpretation of Reish Lakish here, that when Reish Lakish said that bartering chattel, the transaction is affected by the first thing that's delivered, and he said that's true even if the chattel is bags of coins, we seem to be accepting that the reason why he thinks that works is because we're talking about coins that aren't valid currency anymore. They're sort of like a Roman coin that you might have now that you might make a necklace out of or something, right? It's not money that you could spend, even though it's still definitely a coin, but it's not currency anymore. So that would definitely be chattel rather than money now. Okay. Now we have a new case. Amar Rabba Amar Rav Huna, Mechor li be'elu. So Rabba said in the name of Rav Huna, suppose I have a case in which a buyer goes to a seller and says, sell me this thing for these, and sort of shakes some coins in their hand. But they don't say how many coins they have. They don't say how much it's worth. They just kind of shake a handful of coins and show it to the seller, but they don't show it to him clearly enough that he can see what's actually there. So in that case, kana v'yesh lo alav ona'ah. Supposing that the seller says, sure, yes, no problem, then that trade of the unknown amount of money for the object that works, it's kana, right? That the acquisition takes place, but veyesh lo alav ona'ah, but he does have a claim of ona'ah. Ona'ah is something that we're going to get to later in the chapter. I don't think we've defined it yet. But the Mishnah assumes that there is a correct price for just about everything. Whether that is a correct price decreed by the government, or whether it is a correct price that is agreed upon by the merchants, or whether it's just somebody's estimate of what the current going price of something is not clear to me. It's not clear to me that the later texts agree with each other about which one of those things it is. But let's just, for our simplified purposes here, let's assume that everything has a correct price. Almost everything. There'll be some exceptions. If you pay or charge a sixth off of that price, so something is supposed to cost $6 and you only pay $5 for it, or something is supposed to cost $6 and you charge $7 for it, then that is a crime called ona'ah. And in that case, you can complain and the transaction can be reversed. If it's off by exactly a sixth, there's a machloket about this, but I'll just give you one side of the machloket for the moment. If it's off by exactly a sixth, then you just fix the transaction, right? The person who paid too much money gets some of his money back, or the person who didn't pay enough money has to pay a little bit more money, but the transaction stands and you fix the price so that it's the right price. If it was off by more than that, the transaction is canceled and you have to give back the money and the merchandise and start over again. And if it was off by less than that, that may or may not be a crime. There's a dispute about that, but it doesn't invalidate the transaction. The transaction stands because we assume that up to a certain amount of imprecision in the price, buyers and sellers are just sort of okay with sometimes not getting the best deal in the world. Okay, so it would seem here that we're saying that this person who agreed to sell an object without knowing how much he was going to get for it, the transaction works, but if the price turns out to be too far off of what it was supposed to be, he can reverse the transaction. That seems to be what we're saying. And we go on to explain, Kana afagav de lo mashach, the acquisition works even if the merchandise hasn't been delivered yet, meaning it seems like we treat the trading of a handful of uncounted coins for a piece of merchandise, we seem to be treating that as if it's barter, as if we're trading a piece of merchandise for a different piece of merchandise. Because we didn't count the coins, we're going to treat the coins as merchandise. And so just handing over the money would be enough to finish the transaction, even though paying the money is not usually enough to finish the transaction. And de kevan de lo kapid kana de ki chalipin dami, because since he didn't care how much money it was, the acquisition works because it's like chalipin. That seems to mean it's like barter, meaning if I am prepared to trade, I don't know, my cupcake for your apple, it's not because I think that they have the exact same monetary value. It's because I want your apple and you want my cupcake. And so we, agreed to do it, even though it's not really fair. So once you decide that you don't care how much money you're being paid, this seems to work the same way. And at that point, the money isn't really money because we don't really care how much it is. It's really just a thing that the other person wants. And so we're treating this like a barter situation. V'yesh alav ona'ah, and there's ona'ah, dimchor li be'elu ka'amar, because he said, sell it to me for these. And it seems like we're treating the use of the word sell as a sort of a vestige of the idea of buying and selling and having a fair price. And as long as you're still using the word sell, that means you're still asking to be paid an appropriate price. Not such an appropriate price that we treat the money you're being given as money, but close enough that we think that the values have to be at least approximately similar. Okay. Now that was Rabbah in the name of Rav Huna. Now we have Rav Abba, who's another student of Rav Huna, quoting what appears to be the same statement of Rav Huna, except that Rav Abba remembers it differently. So Rav Abba said in the name
Deborah,
of Rav Huna.
Can I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Can you just go back up for a second? So basically, we're saying that this barter or this sale works without any of the traditional, just by saying, by the seller, the buyer saying, here are my coins, sell me what you have, or trade me what you have.
I think the implication is that he actually handed over the money. I think something changed hands, just not the merchandise.
Because it says kana afal gav de lo mashach, so he didn't pull it towards him.
Right, but I think that's the merchandise that the buyer didn't pull. I think the seller did get the money. I believe that is what Rashi says happened here.
Oh.
But I'd have to go back and check.
Okay. And that would have to be the case in order for the sale to work. At least one of them would have to actually physically take the thing.
Well, yes, somebody would have had to physically take something.
Right.
You might be able, if we decide there's no money involved here, you might be able to do it by picking up an object that's not related to the transaction and doing chalipin instead. But someone's going to have to pick up something.
Right. That's why I was wondering how the sale could be valid with nobody doing mashichar, pulling or picking up the pen or the handkerchief or anything that we typically
right. So I think what we are saying here, or we're claiming Rav Huna said here, is the surprising part is that handing over the money makes the transaction work.
Right.
But I don't think anyone would say that if nobody handed anything to anybody, that there would be a transaction.
Okay. Thank you. That's
You're welcome. Okay. So Rav Abba has a different version of what, as I said, seems to be the same lesson that Rav Huna taught, except Rav Abba remembers it differently. He says, Machorli be'elu, kana ve'en lo alav ona. If somebody says, sell to me for these, and presumably he's shaking a handful of coins again, the acquisition works, but there's no claim of ona. And this, I think, makes a certain amount more sense, that if you didn't care how much money you were being paid, you can't come back later and say, but wait, that wasn't enough money. Like that there's something very rational about that. And in fact, it's so rational the Gemara thinks that it's odd, right? It says, Pshita, damim ve'en makpid alehem. It's obvious that if you pay money and nobody cares how much money it was, that would work because it's like chalipin if nobody cared how much money it was. However, chalipinu makpid alehen mai. What happens if you're doing chalipin? Now let's get rid of the money and let's say that we're doing chalipin with objects that we're bartering, but you do care how much they're worth. So let's examine that case. Amar of Adabar Tashma. So Rav Adabar said, I have a braita that I think will answer this problem. Haresha hayato face parato ve'omed. So somebody's standing there holding his cow. Uvacha ve'rov amar lo paratcha lama. And somebody walks up and says, what would you trade your cow for? And the other guy says, La chamora nitzarich. He says, I need a donkey. So the second person says, Yesh li chamor shani noten lecha. So he says, I have a donkey I could give you. Paratcha v'kama. How much do you think your cow is worth? V'kach v'kach. He says, it's worth whatever he says, such and such. And then he asks back, okay, how much is your donkey worth? He says, it's worth such and such. And presumably, they both named similar amounts because apparently they're going to trade the donkey now for the cow. So now the owner of the donkey pulls on the cow. But then the cow owner goes to pull on the donkey. And before he gets there to pull on the donkey drops dead. So now the important question is, to whom did the donkey belong at the time when it dropped dead? And who lost, presumably the donkey is worth a lot of money, who lost the value of the donkey? So the Braita says, Lo kana bal hachamor tapara. Not only does the cow owner not own the dead donkey, but the donkey owner also doesn't own the cow. Right? The whole transaction didn't happen because the second guy didn't get there in time to pull on the donkey. Shma mina chalipinu makpida lehen lo kana. So, who is this? Rav Adabar Ahava, I think. Yeah. Rav Adabar Ahava says, I can learn from this that if you do chalipin and you do care, both people, it sounds like, care exactly what the values are, then the kinyan, the acquisition, does not happen until both items have been delivered. But Rava doesn't like that. Amarava atu chalipin b'shuftani askinan de lo kapti. Rava says, wait a minute, do you think the normal case of chalipin is that people who do chalipin are idiots and they don't care whether they get value for their stuff? Like, it can't be that the only in cases of barter, the normal case is that nobody cares what anything's worth and everyone's just sort of relaxed about whether they get value or not. And it's only, this occasional weird case where people care what the stuff is worth when they're bartering. Rava says that doesn't make any sense. I don't believe that there is a whole economy of people trading things back and forth without caring what they're worth. So he says, you must have misunderstood the whole Breita. Ella kol chalipin makpid kapti v'kana. But the normal case of chalipin has to be a case where, in fact, people do care how much things are worth, and it has to work anyway. All right. The normal case of chalipin is, as soon as one person picks up this one thing, the whole transaction happens, even though the stuff hasn't actually been delivered, sometimes in either direction. So Rava says, in order for chalipin to make any sense, that has to be true even in a case where people care what things are worth. Okay, so then what was our Breita talking about? So the case in our Breita that didn't work because the donkey died before the transaction got finished must be a case where one person is trading a donkey for the other person's cow and lamb. And the donkey owner has pulled on the cow, but he didn't get a chance yet to pull on the lamb. And in the time when he didn't yet get a chance to pull on the lamb, his donkey dies. And that's not proper pulling. Like, he only took the cow. He didn't also take the lamb. So he's only taken part of what he was promised for his donkey. So the transaction isn't finished, and it's his problem that the donkey is dead, not because the other person didn't get their donkey yet, and not because they care about the value, but because one side has to finish taking its merchandise in order for the transaction to be finished, and he only took the cow. He didn't take the lamb yet. So, but Rava says, in a normal case of chalipin, it is normal for people to care whether equal value is being traded, and that has no effect on the fact that once one side of merchandise has been delivered, the transaction is completed. Okay, that is what I have for the evening. Are there questions?
So we never had before that intent is what makes an acquisition. It was always some physical action, right?
Well, I think we've always required a combination, right? If I don't know, I happen to knock something off the table in the marketplace, that doesn't make me the buyer.
Right.
I'd have to be picking it up planning to buy. But yes, you definitely need physical action as well.
Right. And in a normal acquisition, there has to be some physical action and not just an intent.
Correct. And in a normal acquisition, in fact, there needs to be a physical action which needs to be performed on the merchandise, not on the money. Right? That was kind of the point of our Mishnah, right, is that nothing that happens with the money can finish the transaction.
Right, right.
And we've been kind of trying to understand the boundaries of that all the way through. And it seems like sometimes coins aren't actually money. And possibly it will also turn out that sometimes things that aren't coins are money, although we haven't seen such a case yet. But whatever we define as the merchandise, once it needs to be acted on in order to make the transaction.
Right, and they're saying, and who is it? Rava's saying here that he mashachet para, but he did not mashachet tala, in order to explain the example of why the whole transaction fell through, even though he did initially moshech the para.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because Rava thinks that the barter can only fall through if somebody didn't, if nobody got all of their merchandise.
Right. Okay.
But if anyone got all of their merchandise, the transaction's over, no matter how particular you were about value. Whereas the other Rav Ada bar Ava seems to think that if you talk about your cow and your donkey as if they're money, then you can kind of invoke the idea of money into the transaction to the point where the transaction won't finish until you deliver everything. But Rava thinks it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that would be a bad way to run transactions, but that it's ridiculous because it is based on the assumption that normal barter is done foolishly, and he doesn't think that's realistic.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I think I will see you next Monday night. Unless, yeah, no, I as far as I know, we have class next Monday night. Unless something happens with the rally next Tuesday in Washington, D.C. to make me think that should be otherwise. But hopefully I will see you a week from tonight. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you. You too.